welcome back to Coast. She heads up earthfiles.com, and she, of course, is our investigative reporter, Linda Moulton Howe. She's got some incredible stories for us. Plus, in the last hour of the program tonight, conversations with Linda, your questions, perhaps stories that you want her to follow through with. We've found many stories that way. Welcome back to Coast, Linda Moulton Howe. Hey, Linda, how are you?
Well, George, thanks. And since the last Coast a month ago, I have continued to receive, to say 100 or more emails about these strange, mysterious, unexplained booms is an understatement. And in fact, last night is a good example of the way things have been going. I started getting a lot of emails about a loud boom in Tucson, Arizona at 7:45 p.m. local time. And some of the headlines that were being sent to me were like this. Quote, 911 swamped with calls after reports of a boom over Tucson. The Tucson News reported, we've been inundated with calls from people asking what it was. We've made calls to several law enforcement agencies in Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, and everyone says it was none of their aircraft that caused the sonic boom. Captain Adam Goldberg from Northwest Fire District says his department received about 100 calls in a 15-minute period, and the Pima County Sheriff's Office said, quote, we have no information on the cause of this. We are working on it. And I received an email from somebody right after it happened, and it reads this way. I live in northwest of Tucson, and for the past couple of months, we've been experiencing these very strange booms. I don't know how else to explain them. We just had another right now. I could feel the whole house shake. It was unlike anything I've ever experienced. There was a low rumble along with it. I felt like there were 3 or 4 waves of rumbling. My husband had one happen earlier today, but it was much more violent, shorter in duration, and he could feel the percussion impact like an explosion had gone off very close by. And it goes on. Right after that, I started getting emails from San Diego that not only had they had a huge boom that was heard all over the county at 10 a.m. yesterday on the 27th, but that at night, 8:25 p.m., people were reporting 3 more sort of fast, cracking, loud booms. And then if you just go back one more night to February 26th at 5:30 in Charleston, West Virginia, the people were reporting to TV, to 911, everywhere that the buildings were shaking, including all the people who were in the WOWK13 TV newsroom.
Strange.
Yeah, they were reporting it, and everybody was describing this.
All right, hey YouTube, Nick Masika here. I just want to tell you that I actually contacted the news station in Charleston, and they told me that the boom was heard for over 60 miles, and it was felt for over 20 miles. So, this is what makes me think it might be a meteor related, but at the same time, people don't report seeing, a fireball or anything like that. And a lot of these booms tend to happen at night or in the morning. Some do happen during the day, like the one in South Carolina. And this report came out because there was a flare-up of these booms from February 21st, 2013 to the 27th. There were at least 5 reports of mysterious explosions, mystery booms heard around the United States. It was San Diego, Tucson, New Hampshire, some rural area, South Carolina, Charleston, West Virginia, and Illinois, a small town, a suburb off of, East St. Louis, and I believe in Detroit too. So people did report hearing all these booms seem to be increasing in this 1 week period, and they tend to do that. They flare up and then they die down, and they flare up, die down, and they've done that for like 3 times in the past 2 years. All right, back to the radio show.
Boom. Something, again, that they had never heard, and I thought this was one of the most interesting descriptions. I thought somebody had cut a tree down and it fell on our building. We're talking about close, personal, up in your face kinds of sound. I will talk about a couple of others later, but I want to go forward with somebody who got in touch with me after last month's Coast and Earth Files about where I was in the reporting then, and he comes from Louisville, Kentucky. He has asked that he be simply called Peter Jones. He is an emergency medical technician now working in Louisville, but he had been in the Army. He had gone through training. He had been in what was going to be special operations, and he got very badly hurt when heavy equipment fell on his neck and his back and his ankle. And so while he was in medical rehabilitation recovery, it was one day in the summer of 2009 when this happened at Fort Benning, and he was put into rehabilitation. And he ended up in an infantry unit that was preparing to deploy to Iraq. Because of his injuries, he did not go. But he met and talked to an Iraqi vet who described using a new weapons technology referred to as a, quote, sound gun, close quote. I'm not saying this is the answer, but...
All right, no, I really don't believe this story has any relevance to the mystery boom phenomenon. I think it's just something to put on the Coast to Coast AM, just kind of conspiratorial thing, since it is kind of a conspiracy radio show, for your own entertainment. But, so I'm going to kind of skip over that.
He coming into the context of being in an area where there have been a lot of booms in northwestern Kentucky, something else he's going to tell us in the next half hour that's quite extraordinary, and putting it all together, he's very interested and wanted to share and gave me the permission to share with the Coast audience this information about a sound gun weapon.
I'll pass on real quickly to you, too, that Luke Air Force Base is telling everybody out in the Tucson area that one of its jets broke the sound barrier, and that's why everybody was rattled and shaken. That's a pretty big sound barrier blast to me, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't buy it. I know that the one in...
All right, note that there was... this happened again in Tucson, actually back in 2012, I believe it was summer in 2012, and at that time it actually shattered glass, and the Air Force had to come out right away, making a statement that, it was them, they were, doing practice drills and they accidentally went over a sound barrier and shattered glass, but that, I really doubt that was the case, and so now it's happening again, so the probability of that being twice, going over a sound barrier over a city is pretty slim, I think.
San Diego a year ago covered 100 square miles. And now this big expanse of one. We've had these booms reported simultaneously in 5 counties at once in Georgia, and huge expanses of area. And remember also, there is something peculiar about what has happened the last 2 years in this way.
All right, note that this mystery boom phenomenon actually can be dated as far back as 2007, but from 2007 to 2010, they were only on average of like 1 per month, and it was hard to verify if that was truly a mystery boom. But it wasn't until 2011 that they really increased, from an average of 2 per week. And that it reached local news stations, and then in 2012 it really increased again, and it reached actually national attention with the Clintonville incident. So there was definitely an increase from 2011 to 2012. Not sure why, but it seems to still be increasing. So far, the number of booms reported for 2013 is 29 at least.
When you go back to Clintonville, Wisconsin, and the mayor that I interviewed right after she had been out with all of the fire and 911 and police and everyone, and there had been a series of booms, remember?
Mm-hmm. I remember.
And in the interview, and that morning, she stressed that she had felt those booms herself, and that it came up against the bottom of her feet. It even hurt her shin bone. And she said, it's like something is exploding below our feet. Those sorts of descriptions were going on until approximately June of 2012, the summer, not quite a year ago. Then it seemed to me that there was a shift in descriptions in which there were more people saying it's definitely above. It feels like pressure in the air. The people have said it's like an invisible war above me. And what is happening here is not easily explainable, and I think that everybody should understand that in the vast majority, of which there are hundreds, I have a map now of all the regions where all of these have been being reported, and the vast majority, there's still no explanation today. And very interestingly, there was, yesterday, I did an interview with, he's a businessman. He doesn't want to be identified either, but I talked to him at great length. He lives on Merritt Island, Florida, which is straight east of Orlando and only 4 miles from the Kennedy Space Center. He's been there long enough to have heard what it sounds like when the shuttle takes off or if the shuttle was coming in.
Mm-hmm.
And it was not quite a month ago, February 2nd. It was the early evening. We're not talking late evening. And just about after dusk, and he said there was such a loud explosion or boom, and living close to the Kennedy Space Center, he had never heard anything like it. In fact, here's a quote. I've seen and experienced a lot of weird, unexplained things, but had never heard anything like this before, and not without knowing the source. It's odd that as frequent as these booms appear to be happening in different parts of the country, there is not more public information or at least news coverage. I hear this a lot now. I'm not letting go of this story, and when we come back after the break, I'm going to hear more and share with you from Peter Jones about an extraordinary event that happened in Louisville that he thinks is connected to the booms in that part of the country.
Happening.
All right, no, one reason probably I think that this hasn't really reached national news is because these booms do tend to be very concentrated. They happen over a town, but they don't really, cause major damage or anything, other than there was an incident in Tucson that did shattered glass, and that, the Air Force came right away and tried to, say, oh, it was them. And so these booms, normally if the news, if it bleeds, it leads. So it hasn't, really done any major damage. It's, there's a couple reports where it says it might have snapped a tree, it cracked, a little bit of some glass or the ground, but nothing really major. So that's one reason. Another reason is probably these news stations don't realize that this is, a phenomenon. So it's only in 2013 that they really started, actually correlate with other news stations saying that, oh, well, we heard that there are reports coming from other states too, and we're not just the only ones. So in 2013, there will be, I think, an increase of local news stations contacting each other and maybe put in a request to the national media to get this to the national media level.
And welcome back to Coast to Coast. Linda, even if the Tucson case was a fighter jet that broke the sound barrier, how does that explain all the booms all over the country?
It does not.
Nope.
We've got 2 years of this phenomena, and in addition to the loud booming sound that one security camera in Salem, Massachusetts got, I think it was January 5th, 2013, you hear, well, the first thing I think that you see is this flash of white light, and then, whoo, there's a huge cracking boom, and there was no weather. There was no weather of any kind for 72 hours on each.
All right, no, this is why I think it might be a meteor bolide related, just like maybe the one in Russia. But at the same time, like she said, sometimes they don't have any flash of lights, and sometimes they do have a flash of light. So it's hard to say if they're meteor related. Like, let's say if they really are UFOs, then maybe there's a potential that they have the capability of controlling, small meteors and making it come in the atmosphere and testing us. But who knows, So all we know is that sometimes they accompany by a flashlight and sometimes they don't.
Either side of that night. Now, so we've got the bright flashes of light in many cases, and we also have following either the day after or within days of these events, one or more military helicopters show up doing search grids low over houses. And there have been 2 dramatic recent examples of these low searching military helicopters a few days after loud, unexplained booms. And these both occurred mid-January 2013 in Louisville, Kentucky, where Peter Jones is, and Cedar Hills, Utah, where James and Amy Brown are. They live there, and that was my report a month ago on Coast, with them talking about the series of booms, multiple light flashes, the house shaking, and they had seen the triangle of orange lights outside of their.
All right, I actually copied that report, and you can see that on one of my other videos about Mystery Boom Radio Report.
House about 5 days before the booms and these lights started, and tonight I'm going to go in more detail about the helicopters that showed up at his place in Cedar Hills. But first, I would like to return to Peter Jones, the EMT, now in Louisville, Kentucky. He continues with information that goes now beyond the sound gun technology used in Iraq to his shock in mid-January as he stood at his home and he watched for 15 minutes an Army Apache helicopter flying at and below treetop level over the houses in his neighborhood. And this is after the January 7 to 8 booms have been reported all over northwestern Kentucky, southwest.
Now, I don't know if this is related, but maybe the military, heard the boom too, and they sent out some helicopters to, find out what the source was. Maybe they thought it was a threat. So it's possible this could be related, but it's hard to say.
In Indiana and southeastern Illinois, and during that same time period, without either part of the country knowing, in Cedar Hills, Utah, they were experiencing the lights, the booms, and the helicopters there. Here now in Louisville, Kentucky, is Peter Jones.
I haven't personally heard any mysterious booms or crashes of lights in my experience that was unexplainable. However, I live about 20 miles from Fort Knox as the crow flies, and we do see a lot of military activity. I grew up in the area, so before the Armor School left Fort Knox and went to Fort Benning, you knew when they were out in the field training, because 20, 30 miles away, you could still hear these tanks and artillery weapons being utilized.
But you have heard about all of these unexplained and mysterious booms that have been reported even in Kentucky, in your area, over the past 2 years, and all over the United States.
I have. Certainly, I'm an avid.
Now, be careful when she says all over the United States. Specifically, a lot of them occur, east of the Mississippi and west of Nevada. So that's where they happen. Also in the south, around from Texas all the way to South Carolina. So they don't tend to happen, in the plain states. So I don't know why that's the case. It seems to always happen over urban areas or small towns.
Good coast-to-coast listener.
In the context of you hearing about unexplained mysterious booms in my reporting at Earth Files and on Coast for the past 2 years, can you please talk about a recent incident that left you wondering what was happening?
I live in a residential area of the suburbs of Louisville, Kentucky.
Also, let me also state that in another phenomenon, I'm not sure if it's related, but it may be, from 2011 to 2012, there has been, this fad on the internet called strange noise phenomenon. And, local news stations report, people are hearing strange noises around the world. Well, actually, that was just, that was just a viral fad. But there really was something going on. I don't think it was just a coincidence. And people did report hearing loud, jet-like roaring wind noise. And it's very rare. It's not as numerous as the booms, but they definitely happened around the same year the booms started to increase in 2011, 2012. There's people reporting hearing these loud roaring noises in the middle of the night, and, from like 3 a.m. or, 10 p.m. and no explanation. And they seem to be very concentrated, around someone's house, or only heard for about 3 miles, but quite loud. So you can see my, video on that called Strange Noise Phenomenon of 2011 to 2012 and see what you think about that,
I was coming home from a clinical day at the local hospital between 1 and 3 in the afternoon. I pulled into my drive. I got out to enter my home and heard the very distinct thump of rotor wash from a military aircraft. I grew up with a father who was an avid aircraft enthusiast and a trained air traffic controller, so anytime we saw aircraft coming overhead, he'd be like, okay, what kind of aircraft is that? And this is how you identify it. So anyway, I can discern between helicopters that, say, a news agency uses, the police use, flighter stat care use, and this was military. So I looked up, that's really loud, louder than normal, because we occasionally have military aircraft flying overhead in transit from one location to the next. But this was unusual and different this time. And as I was looking up, I caught some movement out of the corner of my eye, and I turned to look at it. It was the main rotor structure of an H-64 Apache helicopter, and I could only see the main rotor because as he banked in a turn, his rotors were coming over top of the trees and the ridge line of the homes as he banked. So this means he was very low, and he wasn't far away on the horizon because the size of the rotor that I saw and the part of the fuselage that I saw was very large.
And was it at tree level?
It was literally at tree level or just a little below. And this guy was in my neighborhood doing what we call map of the earth, which means following the contour of the earth to evade radar. That's a military technique in enemy territory. And the first thing I thought, that guy's doing map of the earth in the neighborhood. He's showing off. He must live here. But as I watched him, he maintained this search pattern, back and forth, slowly banking, kind of circuitous pattern, slowly moving off to the northeast.
So you were recognizing a pattern that you were familiar with from a military operation that would be trying to avoid radar, but at the same time searching for something that, from your point of view, would have to be invisible.
Yeah, that's correct. When I was actually stationed at Fort Bragg, when we were out in the field doing training, we were always, surrounded by these Apache, Kiowa, and Black Hawk helicopters where these pilots were doing trainings at the same time as we were in the same location, and they would come in the very same manner, flying over terrain features, coming in low, hitting the ground, raising up constantly all day long, flying in and out over a military installation in a designated training area for that function, not a residential area.
Is it legal under any circumstances for any of our military operations to be
All right, no, let me just say that there was, other instances like this, the military would practice over urban areas. I think this is just a training drill. For example, in Minneapolis, there was, Black Hawk helicopters flying right between the skyscrapers. And, they did that also, I believe it was in Los Angeles and in downtown Minneapolis. So, sometimes they do perform these maneuvers, in urban areas to practice, because how else would you practice?